So thank you everyone for tuning in and obviously also participating in this particular module so far. So last week we looked at one of the very essential aspects of risk assessment, a very popular methodology, bow tie method. We looked at that. We did a number of exciting exercise, and I like the bow ties that come through. A very interesting discussion we have, and also a number of the feedback that we've also received based on that particular exercise were quite really telling and quite helpful as well. Good to know that you find it really interesting. And of course, today we're looking at crisis decision making. So we're looking at what crisis decision making. And as you will find within the context of crisis and business continuity management, crisis decision making, making decision at the time of crisis is essential. And that is what I'm going to concentrate on. And we're looking at maybe some of the challenges relating to this particular context relating to crisis decision making. But of course, I'm going to introduce my learning outcome for today, what I want you to get out from these particular discussions with you. So obviously, when you're looking at crisis decision making, one of the things that comes to mind is that reputation is at stake, and then of course you have issues of maybe mismanagement, negativities, or speed is of essence, and there are a wide range of options that are there for leaders and business managers to consider as well. So sometimes it could be a time that it could, seems to be very chaotic where actually managers needs to make that speed and accurate decisions and make that smart decision that can help to bring the organization back on track. So today we're going to look at that and see exactly what it means within the context of business continuity management. And of course, we're going to look at some other aspects as so, of course, my learning outcome, what I want you to get today is to look at the natures of crisis environment, so the so-called VUCA environment, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous and business environment in which organization operate today. And of course, we're going to understand why crisis decision making is absolutely essential for any managers or business leaders within an organization. And we'll try to look at how to make smart decisions during the time of crisis. We'll look at some of the problems and challenges of crisis decision making. And of course, we'll wrap it up with business continuity management policies and scope at a time of crisis. So this will be what we'll be looking at, what I'm trying to cover within the course of my discussion with you today. So, but before I try to look at the types of the natures of crisis decision making, I just want to look at the types of problem that managers are more likely to face. The first one relates to well-structured problems. This seems to be more like an emergency type of problem, very straightforward problems, easy to define and to make decision. Decision making under this particular context is very easy to make. So these type of problems are classified as well structured, and different types of problem will require different type of implications as well for managers. So of course you then move on to the other type of problem classified as e-structured problems. So these could be very new type of problems. They are very unusual problems. Information is sometimes incomplete and very ambiguous, not easy to define and make decision on with these type of problems that managers may face. So again, it gives us a clue because the natures of the problem have different set of implications for how managers are more likely to react and the type of decision that managers are more likely to make. And the other type of problem is a crisis problem. So a crisis problem is more of a serious difficulties that require immediate attention, require immediate action. So managers, leaders, everyone needs to make that immediate tough decision. Quick actions is required under crisis situation. And the other type of problem you could come across as a business continuity manager is problem relating to what is classified as a non-crisis problem. It requires resolution but does not have that immediate urgency when you compare that to crisis situations as well. The final part I think I will mention is the opportunity kind of problem, because these are sort of situations that offers very strong potential for very major organizational gain if appropriate actions are in place. So these type of issues are usually considered as opportunity problem. So with crisis decision making, as you know, every managers, every leaders within an organization. So what is it about decision making under crisis situations or crisis decision making, making decision relating to crisis? We know that crisis um, is very essential that organizations manage and try to mitigate the impact of crisis on their business continuity, on their survival, because if it's not properly handled, if it's not properly managed, that could mean the end of that particular organization. So we know that making decision during time of crisis is very essential. It could mean saving life. It could mean protecting employees, protecting job, protecting shareholders or investors fund. It could mean protecting suppliers and also saving helping to save jobs as well. So decision making at the time of crisis is absolutely essential. So what we need to understand is that if you take a very state perspective to crisis situations, so you know that a crisis is more of a situations with three necessary and sufficient conditions from a change maybe in the organization, internal or external environment. So these conditions obviously will determine the type of reaction that decision makers within the organizations are more likely to face. So you're looking at maybe number one, like a threat to basic values. So these could be basic functioning of the organization, which that requires a very simultaneous awareness of the fact that you have limited time to respond. And of course, there is the high level of probability of involvement in the crisis situation in terms of it's going to challenge most managers, most decision makers within the organization as well, to take that proactive decision that they need to bring the situations under control. So what you find with there are some features that actually define a crisis. So I've classified them around maybe 4 or 5 different points. So the number one is that when you're looking at crisis and you're looking at whether to make decisions, you're looking at the severity of the situation, the volatility of the situation. So severe threat, it poses a major threat to the business continuity or the business survival of that particular organization. So you start to know that actually you need to make that quick, bold decision at the time of that particular situation. So severe threat or volatility is another one major point that features as a defining characteristics of crisis. The other point around this is the time pressure. So you're looking at time pressures, the time it takes managers and business leaders to make decisions at the time of crisis is very limited. So managers have limited windows to make a decision relating to exactly what they want to do at the time of crisis. The other point is around surprise or the uniqueness. Sometimes some crises are very unique in the sense that they have not, most organizations have not experienced them previously. So and it poses a different set of maybe a new surprise to leaders in a way that they're trying to figure out what exactly they need to do to mitigate or to manage the impact of that particular crisis from exploding. Of course, it could be very complex as a result of some of the points I've already mentioned as well. So complexity is another factor. So of course, you then start to look at the high uncertainty or ambiguity in the situation that the crisis itself are presented. Because remember in the previous slide when I talked about crisis situations, you're looking at something that requires urgent attention, and sometimes there is no obvious solutions to some of the problems that comes with crisis. So managers needs to make that bold decision to handle to bring these things under control. And I've also mentioned insufficient information. So sometimes we know that with crisis situations, we know that managers don't have that sufficient information to make inform maybe conclusive um, options. So sometimes you've got to make a very clear and properly updated method to look at how the organization can effectively manage the situations in which they are trying to handle. So these features are more likely to impart on crisis decision makers and how that decision makers will make urgent decision makings and demand immediate attention from everyone involved, every stakeholder that's involved within that particular organization. So here I just want to talk about how to make smart decisions and avoid bias maybe during crisis. So there's a number of literatures that have looked at these particular issues. So there are so many things that have been written about how to make decisions at the time of crisis. But when you start to look at how to make smart decisions and avoid bias during a crisis period, you will find that there are a wide range of ways to do this. What I'm going to show you is just one ways to look at one part of the best practices that are out there. So, and obviously, one of the things that I came across this is that you will find that you start with more like you starting with you try to identify the problem. So what are the issues? What are the problems? So you identify it, and you may try to collect the data around this. So sometimes this is some of the weak points. So you collect data, and then of course you try to evaluate the risk. So what could be at risk here? So you can try to do that, and of course you once you've evaluated, so you then try to work in teams and of course maybe smaller teams. At the time of crisis, you need that speed, and you check your cause and effect in terms of the reasoning that is informing whatever decision you are going to arrive at. And then you can test your decisions. You can try to work it out and see whether it's the most viable option for your organization to handle or to resolve that particular issues. And of course, you have to decide. So, but the key thing is that you will find that there are some certain procedures to how decision makers make decision at the time of crisis. But the what most of the literature seems to be pointing out is the fact that you can use there's a methodology to making decisions, and so these methodological aspect seems to be much more touted as part of the best practices related to decision making, trying to identify what problems you've got and try to collect some relevant data and evaluate what potential risks that your organization may be facing. And then of course you can assign responsibility to teams and try to work out some of the possible cause and effect. And of course you test whatever decision that you've now arrived at, and you can then decide finally and make that bold decision as well. Sometimes a number of people, researchers have also pointed to issues around gut feelings as well. So making intuition at each stage, to what extent managers should rely on that when making decision. So of course, so what I've tried to do here is obviously if you look at maybe from crisis decision making, you need that managers need that skill set, right? To make you need the appropriate skill set to make your decision as a managers, and of course you need to have a very clear rules in terms of what roles the decision maker is going to play within the crisis management process. And decision makers, what are the strategies? What are your decision making strategies that you have before you start to look at the actual management of the crisis itself? And therefore, you start to look at what is the response from the decision makers. And of course, you can start to look at some of the stages of the crisis decision making process and looking at the meaning and looking at the broader implication that this particular decision is going to have for that specific organization. So these are very crucial as again, when you look at the steps to decision making during crisis situations, this seems more like what happened within every typical decisions. But within crisis situations, because crisis is also unique itself, so again, you will also find that this is also much more prevalent in a number of other literatures as well. Other studies have also alluded to these particular steps as well. So some of these steps relates to decision maker being able to identify problems and objectives of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. And of course, you try to establish decision making criteria, looking at your exposures, looking at your exposure unit, and do your proper risk assessment. And that will lead you to assessing the risks. And of course, you can identify possible options, and and then you can appraise your options and make your decision. So sometimes you can see how some of these things work. So once you make your decisions, you can implement your decisions, and you try to monitor what your decision, the outcome of it. So you try to monitor it. So when you identify your objectives and at this particular stage, you can look at maybe problems clearly defined. Is it correctly? If it's yes or no, you can refine it. So that's the essence where you have this particular arrow at this particular on this stage. So when you can it's only one of exercise, so it's a continuous process. So you can actually refine it. So you move from identify problems and objectives, establish decision making and criteria. You can assess the risks actually, and then try to identify possible options, and then that will move you to you being able to assess the options as well. And of course, you make a decision and try to implement that decisions, and you can then go on to monitor the aftermath of that particular decision. So again, I find that within crisis incident, when a crisis do happens, so what usually happen with decision makers is the quick initial actions and escalations can happen at that particular stage. So managers needs to take note of that. So timely information sharing with internal stakeholders is absolutely essential. And of course, once that is done, you're looking at assessment of situations and forecasting what is more likely to happen, what is going to be the impact on our business continuity or survival. So that is something that organizations will need to start to work on at that stage. And of course, you're looking at decision making by top management, which usually happens at maybe few people tasked within with the responsibility of making that tough decision for that specific organization. So again, decision making by top management, and of course, if that is done, so is it consistent and faithful to or disclosures to external stakeholders? So you want to look at some of the things. If it's type of a crisis incident that you need to properly inform your external stakeholders, so you need to do that. Of course, once the decision has been made, there is need to share that information with the team members within that particular organizations as well. So there are problems and challenges in crisis decision making, and so some of these challenges relates to issues around surprise and hesitations, because the shock of a crisis can create that delay in terms of response, and possibly allow your critiques or the critiques of the organizations and the media to fill that gap with negative comment and speculation. So you don't want to give room for surprise and speculations. So you want to make sure that you're on top of your game. You engage, you collect informations that can help you to make an informed decision. So these are really essential that managers need to know, that there is no room for negativity because if you don't engage, so as we've seen, that the medias and the critiques of your organizations will just fill in the gap with negative comments and speculations as well. So of course you're looking at pressures and stress which must be channeled by the discipline of a crisis strategy. Sometimes because crisis sometimes invoke pressures and stress on the organizational leaders. So these are challenges. These are tough times because managers and leaders are constantly thinking how to move the organization forward. So these are really tough issues to deal with. So crisis decision making is not something to be relegated to the background. It's something that should be integral part of whatever board that's serious with their risk management activities as well. So mistaking information distribution for communication. So this is again another point that I need to make, that organization leaders shouldn't mistake information distribution for communication. Crisis communication is different from just disseminating information during the time of crisis. Crisis communication is done with a specific goals in mind, and of course we're going to look at that in the course of the modules as well. So you want to don't treat your key audiences as opponents. So these are challenges. Managers, organization tends to treat their want to see their audiences that as opponents, and this is a recipe, is one of the recipe for self-initiated or self-inflicted disaster. So you don't want to treat your key audiences as opponents. Rather, you want to see them as allies, as the case may be. So finally, so at this stage we'll be looking at some of the business continuity management at a time of crisis. So what this means is that when you look at this, or the key things I want to cover here is to look at business continuity um, policies and scope. And of course, we've also posted some examples on your Blackboard that you can look at as well. So of course, so when you start with business continuity planning and scope, so we can look at the very starting point, which is the initiation stage. So this obviously starts with the business continuity or crisis manager trying to define or decide scope and set policy for the organization. So that's the very first stage. So if you're a crisis manager, a business continuity manager, the very first thing you want to do here to ensure you have a very clear scope and set policy, BCM policy, business continuity management policy for your organization. And of course, you can try to define the structure. So what is the structures? So what structures are you going to operate? Who is reporting to what and at what level? So what is their interactions like? So you want to define the structures. And of course, you can then go on to look at how you allocate your resources. And once the resources is properly allocated to different personnel within the organizations, so you start to look at agree specific projects or monitoring mechanisms in place, and of course you set your objectives as well. So the initiation stage is absolutely essential, crucial to your overall business continuity plan. So you then obviously look at planning, implementation, and operational management. So these are absolutely crucial aspect that leaders and managers need to be aware of as well. So you want to establish that strategic and operational condition for your PCM, and this is something that managers certainly needs to be aware of. So of course, when you're setting scope and policy considerations, so the things that you need to look at is what is the remit of your PCM. So in other words, you're looking at the scope, you're looking at to what extent will your PCM policy cover. So you're looking at the extent it will cover. So that would be the remit, that would be the scope of your PCM. And of course, you can see a sample on the module Blackboard, which I've mentioned previously. And also you want to look at where is management of the team to be domiciled. So where do you domicile the management of the team, the core management of the team that will be responsible for maybe a part of your crisis management team. So what would they be based? So you need to take that into consideration. You also want to look at maybe appointing coordinators and champions as well as part of this process, and skill sets of business continuity managers needs to be something that organization needs to constantly train and retrain their employees as well, to make sure that they have that clear risk culture within the organization itself. So this is something that I need to bring to your attention. So of course you're looking at how you define the structures as well. So in trying to define your structures, so you want to have your CEO maybe at the top of the organizations, and the director maybe strategy, and of course you have maybe you have your BCM, business continuity management team, down here, and of course that may then be a thing of, oh, the business continuity coordinator is reporting to the business continuity manager team, and another coordinator reporting back here, another coordinator reporting back here. So this gives you an idea of, in terms of what your structures is meant to look like when you're looking at BCM structures within an organization itself. Of course, you then look at resource allocations. In terms of resource allocation, you try and look at setup, ongoing, and opportunity costs. You want to make sure that you have your strategic investments or petty cash in place for the rainy days. So these are really hard time for most organizations. So this is crucial for organizations to start to look at ways to properly allocate resources. And the other point here is around agreeing mentoring mechanism. So specific outcome and criteria needs to be in place. You want to make sure that you start and end, you have a start and end date for each of those stages. You want to have your clear allocation of responsibility, and also maybe the identification of dependencies as well. So these are crucial to deal with for most managers, for most leaders within the organization itself. So setting objectives as what we're trying to get you to do, to set a very clear BCM objective. So part of the objectives could be to protect supply chain, depends on the natures of the business, or to protect the headquarter functions, or to maintain water supply, or to protect headquarters and branches. So different organization type, different BCM, business continuity objectives. So bear that in mind why when you are preparing your own BCM objective and policy. So finally, I just want to talk about 7 tips for good crisis decision making. So this, number one for me, is to slow down, to take a moment, because why most people do feel a sense of urgency or panic during crisis situations, decision makers needs to slow down. They need to take a moment to reflect, and in doing that, you can brainstorm, you can collect all relevant informations to make informed decision. Do your extensive research, try to brainstorm with maybe colleagues and everyone at work, and also you could do your crisis planning. These all together can help. The other point is around the ability to think through alternative actions. So what would be the alternative actions? And of course, brainstorming and analysis of different options can help at this particular stage. So you could then be looking at think more widely, engage all employees and relevant stakeholders, external stakeholders. So these are crucial. And then you list possible potential solutions and try to prioritize or rank them. You could use baseline method, which is trying to determine the maximum risk tolerance level of that particular organization before you make your judgment as well. So the other point, fourth point, is around ability to plan ahead. So people react differently during crisis plan, business continuity plan, and other crisis and business continuity management frameworks are crucial. Simulations and training are essential at this particular stage when you're looking at planning ahead. So of course, the fifth one is to make a decision. So obviously, this may seem like the obvious, but this is the most important tip. So you actually want to make decision. Sometimes organizations just leave it. and just keep it rolling. So a crisis call for quick and careful, considered decision. So you want to make that informed decision that is backed by empirical and re-justification. So this is really important stuff. So you want to execute and evaluate. So you convert your decision into a clear plan of actions and try to maybe gather teams to execute and propose the solution that is needed. And that's the fun. You want to reflect on the lessons learned from the different stages of the crisis um, process, and then once the crisis is over, you try to reflect on lessons learned from each of the stages actually in that crisis situation. So for me, 70 for good tips for good crisis decision making. Number one is to slow down, take a moment. Number two, brainstorm and collect all relevant information. Think it through. All right, don't rush it, don't be rash, even though we know speed is of essence, but think it through and have a very clear ways of achieving that, and plan ahead as well. Try to make a decision. Don't just leave it for chance. Make a decision, and then of course execute and evaluate your decision and reflect. So these will be my 7 top tips for crisis decision making. So thank you so much. So far, I think we're doing some exercise relating to these, and of course, especially looking at getting you to come up, write your own business continuity management um, policy and scope. So we'll look at that. So that is what we're looking at. Of course, I also created a YouTube page where I post materials as well. So if you put in my name on YouTube, you can just subscribe to get an update when I post new materials. So thank you so much. Of course, I'm going to see a number of you as well when would you have maybe our section as well. So thank you so much, and do have a nice day.